Yeah, it's definitely thought of that. I'm like, oh, there you go. So that would have happened.
Board of Wake Audubon. I'm also here at the Museum of Natural Sciences for 30 some years. Jeff Bean tells me I'm next, the third ranking oldest or longest serving. Which other board members are here tonight from Wake Audubon? We got a few folks here. Hands are up, and we have some folks here who volunteer with us too. So as we go around, hopefully get to meet up with folks, talk to different folks. If anybody here for the first time this evening, we do have some first timers. Wow, that's amazing. Well, thanks for coming out. And we actually, that means I have to go into my sales mode. You know, we are part of the National Audubon Society, and it's a really easy affiliation. It's one of the cheapest around. We offer to do the first year for people if they're interested. You just let us know. We just need your name and address and email, and we pay for the first year. It's $20 a year. I don't know how they keep it so cheap, but if you're interested in joining, you don't have to, but we just let you know that that's an option. So thanks for coming in. So we have bird walks that we do pretty much every weekend these days. If you're not familiar with our website, wakeaudubon.org, we have a calendar, and all these things are listed on our calendar. So you can check the website if you need to have an RSVP, that information will be included, and other details. For example, we're going to Bass Lake, which is down in Holly Springs, Williamson Preserve, or Hilltop Needmore and Fuquay. We go different places around the county, different leaders leading different trips. We have a meetup site. I'll be doing some purple martin banding of the nestlings. We do the nestlings. Susan just did some a few days ago at another colony. We help manage 3 colonies with Purple Martin Conservation Association. Courtney is our lead on that. She does a couple of big gourds at the faculty club with NC State over on Hillsborough Street. And then we have a Prairie Ridge gourd complex. So I'll be going out on the morning of the 18th to the faculty club, the 19th to Prairie Ridge, which is our property that the museum manages, West Raleigh. That'll be going back to the faculty club on the 22nd. There are just so many babies. We want to do it over 2 days, 2 mornings. You can check the information on our website. I'm basically going from 9 to 11, and it's open to the public to come and watch. And, we just lower the gourds, take the babies out, put the little rings on their feet, and pass the babies around a little bit. Not too traumatic, we hope. And put them back in the gourd, and up they go, and get the next babies and do it all over again. But we have a couple hundred baby birds to test, so that's why we're spreading it out over 3 mornings. And of course, that's weather dependent, but usually from what I heard, we're in a dry spell for the next few weeks. So I guess we'll be meeting. On June 29th, we will be working with a event called Let's Go Birding Together. That will be at Anderson Point. So that's part of the LGBTQ community. We have been working with sponsored Field Inclusive and the LGBT Center of Raleigh. And we've been doing that for, I guess, over a year or 2 now, Rick. So yeah, so anyway, I helped with a trip out to our museum about a month ago. It was one of the coldest spring mornings. We went birding. Anyway, it's a great time. So if you're interested, again, check our calendar. That's June 29th. That'll be Anderson Point Park. It's one of the parks we have adopted for years, doing pollinator plant work and some bird trips. We are still looking for a Zoom meeting coordinator, I guess. If you're interested, you can talk to Megan over here. She's our communications chairperson, and she's looking for help. And also, right, well, just talk to Megan. Yeah, there's other things that go along with it. She can help you with the details. We have different committees. We have a conservation committee, and we've had some rotations, so we're still looking for a chairperson to help do that. And if you're interested, let us know, and we'll put you in touch with Mary Abrams. She's usually here, but she's online tonight watching, but she can help fill you in on that. And it says here that we are looking to do some habitat certification a program, so we'll need volunteers for that. That would be visiting yards and certifying if they're bird friendly, maybe pollinator friendly too. The different roles you can fill. This is brand new, and we'll have to do some training. So if you're interested in participating in that, let us know. If you're online, you can say so on Zoom in the chat box, and Mary Abram again is going to help put people together to get that going. On June 22nd, although I'll be doing a little bit of Purple Martin baiting in the morning, we're also working with our folks to do a with Raleigh Pride. So we've been participating in that for years as well. So we have a table event. Rick, do you want to say anything?
Downtown Fayetteville Street District, out in Raleigh Pride. It's going to be our third year. We're the first environmental and conservation group to take part in Raleigh Pride, and we're thrilled to continue with that forward. It's actually one of the most fun tabling events that we have throughout the year. People come with genuine enthusiasm about the bird.
For those online, I'm just having Rick say a few words. Bob, this is our third year for participating with the Raleigh Pride on June 22nd. So we'll have a table event there. And it's just been a great way to get the Wake Audubon word out.
Nature birds, and I'm pretty study. Mostly you're talking about birds, on the bird poster, plants for birds. We have a brochure that we hand out with plants for birds and otherwise. And just have a great conversation with the bluebird boxes for sale. I don't know about you, but I've had 2 broods already at home. It's time for brood number 3.
Rick point out his bluebirds have been fledging already, 2 broods. We sell some boxes usually at these events. And we always need more volunteers. Just let us know if you're interested in that. It's June 22nd. All right, thanks, Rick. And see here, Pollinator Week is coming up. I don't know if we're doing anything in particular this time, but in the past we have. Lately, I think we've just been trying to send people out to other groups that are already doing stuff. For example, there's usually events at Prairie Ridge Eco Station, and one of our former board members works down at Sharon Park, the Harris Lake Park, Wake County Park. They usually do stuff for the week of pollinator. We used to send people down there to do a table event, so I would encourage you to look around that. It's June 17th to 23rd. And with that, also one other thing is I just wanted Missy to say a few words about August. I know it's June, but August is a little different. And so I'm gonna have you say a few words about what's coming up for our August meeting.
Okay, hi everybody. Our meeting in August is on the 13th, and the speaker for that meeting is going to be you all. We need you to come pick out 1 to 5 images. It could be from a vacation, it could be something in your backyard, and come with a story about those images. So that's why, and it's also our potluck dinner. So we'll be breaking bread and sharing stories that night. Are we already posted as far as our emails?
I think so, but if not, I'll make sure this week to do it. Missy and I coordinate the photos that you send in.
Yeah, so you'll be sending your photos to me, and I'll be putting them into a PowerPoint. I'd love for everybody to get their photos to me by August 5th. But if you're a procrastinator and go past that date, you can send them also to John, who will take over at that point leading up to the meeting. So can you think of anything else?
No, that's good. I just like to also highlight that it's not a contest. It's really to get people to just share an image and share a story if you want. So that can be all ages, family members doing stuff. It's a potluck. Bring your kids or whatever. And I wish you could bring the dogs, but we can't do that. But bring folks along and any image, just to share some story. There's a lot of wildlife in your backyard. So yeah, we have some good photographers in the group, but this is a chance for everybody to do something. And really that's it. I guess the last thing is I'll just mention that I'll be speaking in July about mold. And then we'll, we will have programs. Again, check our calendar because things are going on every month. And I think that's everything. So with that, I'm gonna have Jeff Mead come up. So he can introduce our speaker. And Jeff was on the board for many years and he took a break recently. But I came back to work tonight. He's had like 5 months to decompress and now can.
Also get the that and so that's PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Hey, John just told me that I was gonna be introducing Susan, and I know some things about Susan, but I don't know everything about her, which is probably a pretty good thing. I've known her a pretty long time, and many of you know her as well. She's spoken to our group before.
We lost audio.
Jeff, you're silenced. It says so on the screen. You're silent. We can't hear you.
Unmute yourself.
No people online.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, okay.
All right.
All right. No, yeah, John just asked me to introduce Susan, and I know some things about her, but I don't know everything about her, which is good. But I've known Susan a long time, and many of you know her as well. She's very focused on birds for the last 20 years of her life, particularly hummingbirds. Susan holds a BS in wildlife biology from Cornell and a master's in wildlife ecology from NC State here. And she used to work here at the museum for a little while in the 90s. And really got interested in hummingbirds at that time, and now the leading hummingbird researcher in the state. She's worked with hummingbirds on a statewide basis, particularly interested in their winter ecology. Has documented, I think, about 7 new species of hummingbirds in the state. Of course, we have the ruby-throated that breeds here, but we have a lot of western species that winter here. Is that a new thing, or has it always been going on and people just started paying attention? Maybe Susan has an opinion on that. She can tell us, but she has banded over 5,000 hummingbirds, and they all died sadly from having those bands put on. Not really. She catches them year after year after year. Over 300 that she's banded have been species other than ruby throats. We do get a lot of western species here in the winter, and she's going to talk about those as well as ruby throat ecology. Susan is a co-founder and current science director of the Cape Fear Bird Observatory, and she's a seasonal naturalist in the Weymouth Woods and writes a lot of articles for things like O. Henry and Pine Straw magazines, and that are published out of the Sand Hills in the Pilot newspaper. Just a very, very busy person, very focused on hummingbirds, and I'll let her tell you all about.
Thanks, Jeff. I guess the first thing we need to do is get the presentation back up. I don't know how we lost it.
It's a lot of hummingbirds, and I can attest to the fact that I'm rebooting PowerPoint right now because we're not really sure how we lost the projector.
Unplug here.
Okay.
I just unplug this.
We're rebooting our system here. See if that fixes.
Let me leave it off.
Oh. Well, it's good, sir.
The main one.
No, I got the left one. That's really odd.
So I can't do this presentation without slides. I've had to do it before. Sometimes I've elected to do it or not been able to use slides and been able to do this, but it is a lot more impactful if we can see. Obviously. Okay, yeah, it's good.
Right then,
Yeah.
tried it.
It looks like it's, yeah.
Don't think it likes it being plugged in at first. In other words, it just doesn't like it. Like, likes to be.
Technology is just fantastic when it works.
Oh, it was.
Okay. See what happens next. It worked so well when we first plugged everything in.
Over there.
Just don't.
But it's blinking, this is the problem, it's doing this blinking,
Why does it keep
which it was
doing
doing before too.
What is it doing?
I have no idea, I wasn't touching it, dang, it's not me. Oh, I don't know, that did not look good.
Understand. I don't think this is- I don't like this.
Don's fiddling with the boards, so hopefully we gotta sidestep this little hitch.
I don't like that little one. Brand new problem. I like.
So as Jeff said, I've been studying hummingbirds for a long time. Actually, it's almost 25 years. It'll be 25 years in September. And in some ways, to me, it feels like it was just yesterday that I started doing this work. And in a lot of other days, it feels like it was an eternity ago because so much has happened on the hummingbird front here. At least we've learned so much about hummingbirds here in North Carolina. And I'm also thrilled that it's not just me. It hasn't been just me for some time. I worked with cooperators in the western part of the state. Dwayne Martin is on my sub permit, and he also has a younger lady named Tiffany who's also working with us. So the three of us are trying to cover North Carolina, which is not very effective because, as you all know, it's a big state. So there are a lot of places to go to find hummingbirds, to work with hummingbirds, to see hummingbirds. And I'm always looking for more people to add to the team. The possibility that we're going to have a couple other people, hopefully before long, through the Bird Observatory that will get involved with banding work here as well. Because I really would love to have more of us to be able to really do a better job at documenting hummingbirds across the state. And in particular, as Jeff said, in the wintertime, when we know these individuals are here, we would love to learn more about them and really get out and band more of them. As it stands right now with the wintering population, I only ever get out to a fraction of them every year because either they don't stay for very long, they're very far away and I can't schedule to get there in time. There are various things that happen that they get challenging for me to get to hummingbirds, especially if they're not right here in Wake County where I live or down in the Sandhills where I spend a lot of time. So yeah, I'm always on the lookout for people that are interested in getting involved with our research. And it's something that is basically a commitment of time. Uh, It really doesn't matter how old you are or what your educational background is. Really what it comes down to is a passion for hummingbirds and wanting to learn about them. For me, I feel like I'm still learning. I don't like being called a hummingbird expert because I feel like I'm still learning now. There's just so much to know about these birds. And so, yeah, I'm always looking for more people to get involved. So just plant that seed in the back of your mind. Hopefully we'll have a really full-fledged team of hummingbird folks here in North Carolina before my day comes when I have getting flyers. I can turn it over to a real good group of folks that can take the torch and move forward. But with hummingbird work, the summer for ruby-throateds here is the time. And we all have hummingbirds around us now, whether you know it or not. Everybody has seen one hummingbird so far this season. Yeah. I imagine most of you have feeders. Feeders, yes. Flowers, hopefully. Everybody, yeah. And so we're seeing ruby-throats. Ruby-throats are the only species that breeds east of the Mississippi. So no matter whether you're in Canada on the eastern side, or if you're down into Georgia, in North Carolina from the mountains to the coast, you could find ruby-throated hummingbirds during the summer months. And here in Wake County, you can expect hummingbirds from early April through September, into October these days. And some people are lucky enough to have ruby-throateds show or linger through a good bit of October, maybe even in early November. That wasn't how it used to be when I first started doing this work, but it definitely is the case now. Probably somewhat has to do with climate, but we don't know for sure. But in any case, we have hummingbirds around us, but peak season for ruby-throateds will not be till much later in the summer, till end of July, beginning of August. This is the time between the end of May and the beginning of July when things are quiet around feeders. And it is disconcerting. And I have been getting calls every other day or emails every other day. Where are the hummingbirds? Where have they gone? And I have to explain to people, this is the time of year when they're doing their thing au naturel. They are doing their thing out there away from your feeder. And so this is the time of year. It's not like August. It's not like late July. You're not going to have a lot of sightings necessarily. So you just have to kind of keep the faith and understand that things will pick up later in June. Hopefully by early July, you should be seeing more activity at your feeders. In spring, the male ruby-throateds, the only ones that have the bright red throat, and we have examples of hummingbirds, of course, since this is a museum-related event. We have stuffed specimens up here, so you can come up and look at them. If we don't have the opportunity to see the photos tonight, we'll be able to actually look at the hummingbirds that are here, our specimens, before the night's over. So the males came back first. They will stake out a breeding area in primo hummingbird habitat, whatever that is. I'm really sure what that is, but I have a feeling that it tends to be locations with thicker vegetation. That's what the males are looking for. They're looking for a place where they know that the gal will come through a little bit later on. So the males will set up their little breeding territory, and that's where they'll stay from the time they return until early July. So they're on site ahead of the females. Female ruby-throats are going to be making their own later, get back here by we think mid to late April. And when the females get back, she's going to be out there almost immediately looking for a place to build a nest. She may use the same tree she used last year if she was successful on the spot. So she may go back and use the same branch on the same tree. She's not going to ever reuse a nest. Female hummingbirds have to make a new nest every time, but she may go back to the same spot. The females, believe it or not, they do all of the work during the summer when it comes to raising the family. They go out to find the male who's out there looking handsome, who's going to do his best to impress a female when she enters his breeding territory. And by that, I mean, he's gonna be up there in the air swinging like a big old pendulum through the air, doing some fancy flying to try to impress her. And she'll be sitting watching, and if she seems impressed, or at least she doesn't fly away, they'll get right in front of her face and do what we call a shuttle display. And you'll hear them going zip, 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 right in front of her face. And if she thinks that that's adequate in terms of, breeding behavior, she will allow him to mate with her, which will take about a second and a half. And then she'll be off back to her nest, and he will wait for the next female.
I'm gonna let them know when you're trying. I don't think this computer will talk to this projector.
Yeah, I can put it on. Not sure.
Okay.
Let's just, so let's take a hiatus for a second.
Thanks for your patience, folks. This is great.
There is something up to me about our system, and she has a new computer. There's something about the old and the new, and they are not happy to communicate with one another. That we're gonna see about transferring over. She will hopefully find her little flash drive. She's gonna bring a little flash drive. I will just try on a different lap. But I tried different settings, and I tried 3 different cables. Usually it's $2 cable is the problem, but it's just, just when you think it's settled down, and then it keeps flickering. So we're just gonna go ahead and switch over to Megan's.
If we can see Megan and hear her, that would be good. Like where she is now, we can see her.
We are, while I have you, rented a new traveling exhibit. It's on pollinators. And Wake All on we've done a lot to promote native plants for about, I've lost track. College and some other groups and nurseries to promote native plants. Larry's done a lot with different groups. And getting plants and gardens and stuff, and I know the board members have done stuff, and so, anyway, the museum, we're gonna have an opening this weekend, so I know I'm helping with a VIP event Thursday, in my spare time, I do pollinators, and then Friday is like a museum members thing, I think Saturday is open to the general public. They're usually pretty well done, when we rent these, they're usually designed by the larger museums in the country, sometimes other countries, we rent them, and they are usually pretty well done, so. If you're interested in that, check it out, again, starting Saturday, and then, it should be they're usually done for about 6 months, and there's usually different activities for different ages, and that sort of thing, family fun.
Okay, now I need your help.
All right, 90 minutes.
Am I using this one or this one? Okay,
Right now,
yeah, which one is plugged in?
right now, the USB
This one?
is plugged in.
Okay.
I can plug in that one.
That's all good. Let's try this one.
Yeah, switched everything. See. I do a bee wasp in my neighborhood talk, which I've done for a few years now. And the other day I was outside just checking the milkweed, the common milkweed is its flowers. So I have a great plants full of bumblebees and little bees and big carpenter bees. And then there was one flying around. It looked like a thread-waisted wasp. There was a few species that I've documented, so I always got my little camera, my point and shoot. It's got a pretty good lens. I got some great photos, and I went in and put it on a naturalist so that I could learn what it was. And it's like, oh, that's not a wasp at all. It's a fly. It looks just like a little thread-waisted wasp. It's a parasite. It's kind of creepy. So it's a thick-headed fly. My wife was like, oh yeah, I know all about that. I know what she meant. And but it lays its eggs inside a bumblebee. Not usually the parasites lay on an egg or a caterpillar or a larva No, they go for the adult bee. The egg hatches out and it chews its way out. I know, it's like creepy. And there it is in my front yard. I've never seen it my first time in all these years. Taking photos of every little thing out there. And you just never know what's gonna be in your yard. There's so much wildlife. Especially when you plant a few of these native plants, it doesn't take much. I've got this like
Okay.
50 milkweeds out there and they're just full of, they look like we're heading along. We might be ready to go. Sorry for the
Okay.
delay.
You stop talking. You're great. Zoom, can you hear us?
No, I mean. Oh, it's 2 months.
Yes, I could hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you
Touchdown.
I can hear.
and I can see the hummingbird picture. Thank you.
It's lovely.
Okay,
Everybody can see it.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Let's just get rolling here. As Jeff said, I do have these two different hats that I wear when it comes to hummingbird work. And I do have a lot of other bird work that I do, but for tonight, these two pretty much cover it. Oh,
Yeah. you just-
just cut it, okay, all right. And for those of you who haven't heard, this is a little bit about our relatively new endeavor, although it's growing all the time. We can say that we've actually fledged as an organization because we have some pretty significant grant money coming in now, in addition to lots of private donations and also money that's coming through fundraisers, everything from T-shirts to raffles and all kinds of things that we've been doing through the Bird Observatory in the last 4 years now. So given the fact that we were created during COVID and we're doing as well as we're doing, we're very happy about that. And I think you'll be hearing more about our activities as time goes by. And for anybody who's interested and wants one, I have some free stickers up on the table that you can take with you. If you would like to proudly display one of our logo stickers, that would be fantastic. Okay. So hummingbirds really are something that enchant people of all ages. And you can see this little fella here's got one. And I bet I can guess why he's got that hummingbird on the sticker. I think they had a hummingbird fly into their garage. Anybody have that experience with hummingbirds flown into your garage? Yeah. Unfortunately, it happens a lot in the summer, and it's usually where you've got an electric garage door opener, and the bird goes in to investigate. Yes, that little red pull cord knob, emergency pull cord knob. It somehow is fascinating the hummingbird. So they go to explore, and when they realize it's nothing interesting, then they go to leave. Well, what do birds do when they go to leave? They fly up. And they encounter this thing above our heads called ceiling, and it's very confusing. And they may or may not be able to find their way out on their own. And I think in the case of this little bird, it got pretty tired, and so it was resting on this little fellow's finger. But then you can just carefully carry it outside, and it'll be on its way. The way to deal with this problem, by the way, is to wrap that emergency pull cord in something like the knob, it's something like aluminum foil, and that way the birds will be attracted to that particular thing and hopefully not come in and get stuck in your garage. But it is a magical experience to see a hummingbird up close. I can say it, and I still say it now, even though I have banded thousands and thousands of them. They are amazing. These birds have always been referred to in magical ways by cultures, certainly cultures in Central and South America for thousands of years as winged gems or as gods of some kind. They have very mystical, magical qualities, and they just are really something to appreciate. And they very easily mesmerize people of all ages. And even though we only have this one species here east of the Mississippi, ruby throats still are really harmless birds. They are the only ones that can truly hover. They have wings that move in a figure eight type motion. Their anatomy is very different, so they can truly hover. And it is amazing to watch. They can fly sideways, backwards, and also upside down. They also have very long tongues. If you ever stare at your hummingbird feeder, if you've got one of those saucer types where you can see down to the bottom of the feeder, you may notice when the level of sugar water is going down, you may be able to see the hummingbird tongue reaching all the way down in. And that's because hummingbirds will feed at flowers with corollas that are twice as long as their bill. That tongue has evolved to be able to get into those tubular blooms all the way to the very bottom where the nectar is. And so they've got this very long tongue, half of which is housed in the bill, the other half is housed on the top of the head, quite like a woodpecker, so that it actually attaches on the back of the top of the head. Very different arrangement, but very effective for getting to that nectar. Iridescence is another quality of hummingbirds that is quite unique. We do have indigo buntings, which are also iridescent here in North Carolina. That iridescence means that the color is created not by pigment, but by light refracting and reflecting off of the bird's feathers. So if they're sitting at different angles in different places, they look different colors. And you can see these two male ruby throats sitting on this feeder. The one on the left-hand side, it's got more light hitting his throat, so you can see that ruby red gorget or throat patch. Whereas the bird on the right, you don't see any color at all because of the angle of the sun there. So that throat on a male can look red, it can look orange, can look purple, depending on the way the light is hitting it. But if these fellows are sitting in the shade, maybe under your front porch where there's not much direct sunlight, they may just look gray and white, or black, gray, and white. So iridescence is something that's also very unique to these birds and makes it tricky to identify them, for sure. The males are the only ones with a full red throat, okay? The adult males. So the males that you're seeing right now, full red throat, that is very definitely important to be able to impress the females. They first and foremost have to have that bright red gorget. You also see the hummingbird male has a forked black tail that's relatively long, and that's so he can do that fancy flying that I was talking about. And all of this behavior is really important for hummingbirds because has anybody ever heard a hummingbird sing? No, they don't sing. They make noises, but they chitter and chatter, but they don't sing. So they have to use body language. And that's what this fancy flying is about, is it's a way for them to communicate with one another, the males with the females, with other birds, whatever it may be, they have to use body language. And for the males, that involves a lot of fancy flying. So they need a long, nice rudder to be able to make that possible. The females, on the other hand, are very well camouflaged because, as I was starting to say, the females, they do a lot of work in the summer. They raise up to 2 broods during the course of the summer months. And when you're something as small as a hummingbird sitting on a nest, the only way to really feel safe is if you're well camouflaged. And these females are well camouflaged. When they're sitting on a nest, not moving, you're going to be hard pressed to even know that they are there because they're just green on the top, and their green is iridescent as well. And so in lower light, they're going to look just like a leaf sitting there motionless. And they're going to be sitting on something that's also well camouflaged. That nest is going to look like it's just part of the branch. I do have a nest up here tonight if you want to come look at it. The nest of a female hummingbird is going to be fairly deep because that nest, as you can see, is on a down-sloping branch. It's about as thick as my finger. So that nest needs to be deep to hold those eggs and nestlings when the wind blows. Got to be nice and cushioned and deep in there to hold them. So it's a pretty significantly sized nest for a small bird. 2 small white eggs. And the neat thing about this nest, in addition to it being so well camouflaged as it is here, is that it has this ability to stretch as the babies grow. You can see this nest now with the 2 youngsters in it. The edge of that nest in particular is stretching as the babies grow, and that's because it is mostly stuck together with spider webbing, which stretches wonderfully. They may also use plant sap in their nests as well. The way that that nest attaches to the branch is primarily with lots of spider silk. Okay, so the nest, very good at holding those babies. These 2 little birds here
still probably have a good week to go before they'll be leaving the nest. We think that the incubation period is typically about 2 weeks before the eggs hatch. And then after that, the babies are in the nest for 3 to 4 weeks being fed by mama. Until they are fully grown, fully feathered, fully capable of independent living. Because when the time comes that these birds leave the nest, they may or may not be with their mothers for very long, if at all. Especially early in the season, mama may start making nest number 2 before she's done feeding these babies in nest number 1. She's a very busy gal. And so the babies, when they are ready to fledge and start out, they leave that nest, they're not gonna come back to the nest, and they may or may not be with mama for very long. That means most of what they need to know is already up here. It's been handed down genetically, and it is instinctive. How to get away from predators, where to sleep at night, what to feed on, all of that is pretty much already up here when these little birds leave the nest. That's going to be happening, the first young hummingbirds should be leaving the nest anytime now, if things are on schedule. And so we'll start to see more activity in our yard. We'll also start to see birds that look a little different. The younger males, of which this photo is, will often have 5 o'clock shadow, sort of gray streaking in their throats, and they may have a few to many red feathers before they head south. I think some of them actually leave the nest with 1 or 2 red feathers already, but some of them will only just have gray streaking, and then the gorget will gradually come in, some this summer, and certainly the rest of those red feathers on the males will need to come in over the winter as they're molting before they head north again in order for those birds to be able to breed. But you'll notice on this young male, in addition to his streaking in the throat, that his tail doesn't look like his dad's. His tail actually looks more like his mama's. It's got white tips on it, and it's double rounded. So that tail is actually going to be shorter than it will be when he is an adult. He's gonna have to look completely different when he comes back in the spring to be able to impress the ladies. But I will say, from the moment these young hummingbirds leave the nest, they are full of attitude. And since the females, are bigger than the males, young females can beat up on the young males. The young males will sometimes be able to win altercations with the adult males, because the adult males are already getting kind of tired after defending a territory for a couple of months. These young males come out, they're all fresh and ready to roll, and like I said, full of attitude. So the young hummingbirds, they look different, they may act a little differently. And they certainly are going to be curious, and they may be less afraid of us, as youngsters often are. They kind of fearless attitude, but they will certainly make their presence known. And when the young birds are around in numbers, that's when the activity goes up in your yard, and certainly when your sugar water feeder starts to get low. When hummingbirds are acting aggressively, most of the time it's like with so many species, it's bluff. They're vocalizing, maybe puffing their feathers up, but hummingbirds sometimes do get into real fights. And what it ends up being is like these 2 guys here who were at a friend of mine's house, and they were fighting for about 15 minutes and ended up on the ground at one point. Sometimes it gets very heated, but usually it doesn't. If they are having an aerial sort of combat, they may body slam one another. And when I hear this, kind of the hair on the back of my neck stands up. But generally they do not make contact, and they do not want to use their bills as a weapon for sure. A hummingbird's bill is living tissue, and as I said, it's protecting the tongue. It is really critical that a hummingbird have a healthy bill to protect that tongue so that it can feed normally. So they are not going to be inclined to use that tongue as bill as any kind of a weapon. But they sometimes do push each other around, or like I said, kind of body slam one another when they're getting particularly heated in discussion. But generally, you're just not gonna see this. You're gonna hear them chittering and chattering at one another, maybe kind of doing some dog fights, chasing one another through their territory. But generally, that's pretty much all that you'll see. In the summertime, at least once or sometimes twice in the season, I'll get a call from somebody who has a white hummingbird, who has heard about a white hummingbird. In the ruby-throated world, there are partial albinos, there are leucistic individuals, and there are full albinos. Full albinos are very rare. I have only handled 3 full albinos, but I've seen pictures and I've handled other white hummingbirds that are not full albinos. In fact, you can see with this individual in the picture that the lower part of his rump is gray and his bill is also kind of a gray color. This bird is a partial albino. Sometimes we'll have birds that are reported that are kind of a cream color, or they may be gray all over. Clearly though, not the normal coloration that you'd expect. But a full albino is going to be bright white with no pigment in the feet or the bill, and they're going to have a red eye like this bird does here. This was the very first albino that I ever handled and banded, and this was actually not far from here in Holly Springs. But we've had others in North Carolina. We've had photo documentation across the state from a number of locations. Not a number, a few, but a number of white hummingbirds have been photo documented that weren't banded. But this is something that I'm always on the lookout for. Interestingly, these white birds are all female. We don't know what's going on with that, but quite honestly, there haven't been a lot of these white birds, especially albinos, that have been studied very much because they are not, like I said, we'll hear about white hummingbirds or partially white hummingbirds, but full albinos in particular, pretty poorly understood. The one thing that I can tell you is they don't survive the winter. They may not even survive migration south, which makes sense because albino feathers are actually quite brittle. And the lifestyle of a hummingbird is really not conducive to having brittle, white feathers. They wear very quickly, so we don't think that these birds actually live really for all that long. But they are definitely interesting and something that we, as a group, all those hummingbird banders would love to get a better understanding of down the road. I could spend a whole another night talking about hummingbird plants. But I think probably everybody in the room knows that hummingbird plants that have evolved with hummingbirds have these long tubular blooms that tend to be brightly colored, usually red, orange, pink. Hummingbird color vision is fantastic. They can see red, unobstructed, 1/2 to 3/4 of a mile away. Their color vision is much better than ours, so that they can find those food plants like this coral honeysuckle, one of their favorites, one of their native favorites. Trumpet creeper is blooming now. Anybody been seeing trumpet creeper? Yeah, that's another one that evolved with hummingbirds. So they have these long tubular blooms. They have nectar that is not sweeter necessarily than other plants. It's that these hummingbird plants produce a significant amount of nectar per bloom while that bloom is open, and that's what's attracting hummingbirds. From research that was done down in Louisiana, we know that they like a sugar concentration between about 25% and 34%. That is what kind of is the range of what the hummingbird is looking for to give it, enough bang for the buck. So there are lots of plants out there, native plants and non-native plants that you can get for hummingbirds that fall into this category. Vines, obviously, but also trees and woody perennials and also other types of perennials. I have a list of plants, a couple lists of plants up here on the table if you're interested in things, whether native or not native, that you might try for hummingbirds. We all know about Carolina jessamine, that's blooming in the spring as the birds are making their way north. And that is obviously a good, easy one to grow here in North Carolina. These non-native hummingbird plants, for the most part, are not plants that are going to become invasive in your yard. I'm very careful about the ones that are on my list as far as that goes. The hummingbird plants that are the best as a group are the salvias or the sages, and this is one of them here that blooms in the fall and or spring. Salvia greggii, and this comes in many forms, different colors, different heights. You may hear of the varieties called Cherry Chief, Cherry Queen, Hot Lips is a variety of this. There are just dozens of the Salvia greggii that have been cultivated, and they're all really good for hummingbirds. You can just pick or choose what kind you like. They prefer a lot of sun, but they'll do just fine in partial shade. The nice thing is all these salvias come from the tropics where the soil is crummy, and the soil is not that great here either, so you don't have to, worry that these plants will thrive. And the salvias that I'm mentioning tend to be perennial, so just put them in one time and you're good to go. This salvia here is the one that ruby-throateds and other species of hummingbirds, but ruby-throateds we know for sure really, really love. This, as you can see, has got a tubular bloom, but it's not red, it's actually blue. The birds figured this plant out though very quickly, and we now know through the research done in Louisiana that it's not because it's any sweeter, it's because these blooms, when they're open for the 3 or 4 days that they're open, produce a lot of nectar. And so the hummingbirds just feast on this stuff day after day. And in my yard, this Salvia guarnica, or Brazilian sage, will bloom from before Memorial Day through Labor Day, through September in a lot of years. I'd start to kind of, not bloom quite as much, but it will still be blooming pretty heartily through the heat of the summer, and the hummingbirds just love it. And this Brazilian sage is also grown in a number of varieties as well, including Purple Majesty, blue and black, number of varieties of stuff that you can find easily. And again, the deer and the rabbits really don't like it, but the hummingbirds love it. Of course, when we're talking about hummingbirds, we should these days, with all of the talk about pollinators, realize that they are important pollinators. They are pollinating these plants that they love, but they're also pollinating other things you might not realize they're pollinating, like in your yard. They may come to your okra. Anybody seen them at your okra flowers? Even basil, those little white flowers on basil, if you let it go to flower, they will come and pollinate that. There are lots of things that they pollinate, including trees in the spring. They will come to basswood. We think they use tulip poplar. The native azaleas, flame azaleas and things, they definitely come to nectar at those. So they are definitely a pollinator, just like the insects that we think of more commonly as being such. Yes, tulip poplar. In the early spring or in the winter, if the hummingbirds are around, they will be attracted to camellias and sasanquas if they have enough nectar in the bloom. So, if you've got these in your yard already, you may have something a little different that the hummingbirds are going to be using, especially during the cooler months of the year. And, even things with tiny flowers like lantana that we tend to think of as being good for butterflies and insects, the hummingbirds will visit these flowers as well. And so when you're gardening for hummingbirds, you're gardening for butterflies, and oftentimes vice versa. The things you're putting in for butterflies, the hummingbirds may be visiting as well. So it's just a wonderful thing to do to provide for your hummingbirds in terms of plants, and maybe even better than providing feeders. But the other thing about vegetation in our yards is that it also provides protection for hummingbirds. So evergreens in particular, like cedars, like hollies, are going to give them shelter. And so, so many of us already have wonderful native evergreens in our yards, and hummingbirds are definitely taking advantage of that for shelter. But also, hummingbirds are going to be using vegetation because of the insects associated with it. These guys and gals are actually mainly carnivores. They're only using sugar water and nectar as kind of a pick-me-up or a way to gain some weight in the fall pretty quickly. They are mainly looking for insects. And this is again why I think the males, when they carve out their breeding territory, tend to be in areas that are a little wetter where it's buggier. And they know the females are gonna come looking for meat. And so if they're where the meat is, they're gonna have better luck attracting females into their breeding territory. Hummingbirds will fly catch, and that's what this little bird is doing. This is actually a ruby throat during the winter down near Lake Matamesquite. And I think this is a he, maybe an immature male, I think, is looking for insects flying around to be able to fly out and grab out of the air. And if you need proof of that, we actually do have several photos right these days that you can find of hummingbirds actually eating the insects. It's pretty amazing photo here of one grabbing something out of the air. What insects do they eat? All I can tell you is it's a morsel that fits down the hatch. I don't think they're too picky, as long as they can grab it out of the air and swallow it. They also will go into vegetation and pick insects like aphids, spiders, mites off of vegetation. So they have they've got very good vision, not just color vision, but very good vision to be able to find, to see and catch these small bodied insects. But in order to have these insects, these small insects, we need to have the right type of vegetation. We need to have native vegetation that's going to support this food web in order to have the insects for our ruby throats. And in the summer, it's very important, especially for the females when they're feeding the young, because those young need lots and lots of insects to grow and to be healthy. And I think, unfortunately, we are have been noticing declines in the ruby-throated population across North Carolina, some places probably more so than others. And I strongly suspect that it's due to the fact that these small insects are not as abundant as they once were. It's been over 10 years now that I started documenting a definite decline in breeding productivity in the summer. And I think now that has translated to fewer adults, unfortunately. I really have to wonder if the females are able to pull off the first brood, because I don't see very many young ruby-throateds in June. I see very, very few, in fact. I don't start to see them until later in July. And I just have to think that at a time of the season where the insect levels haven't really picked up yet, and with the fact that these small insects are going to be ones that may not really appear till later in the summer, that the females are having a harder time pulling off that first brood, and that they're able to do it later in the summer when the insects then become more prolific. But I think that's probably really the key to what's going on with ruby throats and the numbers and the lack of hummingbirds on the landscape. And I think it's actually a very real thing. Unfortunately, though, we don't know and have not known and never really will know to an order of magnitude how many ruby throats there are in in North America. And that's because studying them is so challenging, and there are so few of us studying these birds that we really can't get at that number. But all I can say is, by virtue of doing this work for as long as I have been, that I definitely have in my data a downward trend. I think it's a very real thing, and I think not only not having the native vegetation that the insects need, but also this fact that there's more and more chemical on the landscape, and there's even residual chemical in the atmosphere that's raining down in places like the Amazon, where there isn't necessarily anybody going out and spreading Roundup or anything else. There's just so much residual chemical that it's impacting the insects globally. But it's definitely in fact impacting our hummingbirds, but it's impacting insectivores, a lot of insectivores other than hummingbirds. when we think about predators, people always, ask me about predators and hummingbirds, and I think the time when ruby-throateds are the most vulnerable to predation is when they're in the nest and they can't fly, they can't defend themselves. They may, even in that camouflage nest, get picked off by something like a climbing snake. Maybe a small squirrel could get out on the end of a branch. They may be able to be grabbed by something like a grackle or a blue jay. But once they're out of the nest, we don't think of them being as vulnerable to predation. One of the predators that we know is out there is not this individual here. This is a Carolina mantid, but Chinese mantids, which are twice or 3 times the size of a Carolina mantid, can and do catch hummingbirds. Okay. This little guy, this Carolina mantid on this particular feeder, I think was just noticing the movement and was hoping for a meal. But unless there's some sort of insects going in there amongst the flowers, there aren't going to be insects at this particular feeder. It just was sensing movement, and so came to kind of check it out. But Chinese mantids are something you will definitely want to remove from around your feeder if you see any show up, because they are definitely a hazard to hummingbirds. We have spiders like the golden orb weaver in the summertime that create these very sticky webs that hummingbirds can get stuck in. And if they get stuck in a spider web, they may or may not be able to free themselves. And yeah, this sounds kind of ironic given the fact that they are produced in a nest that's being held together with spider webbing. But unfortunately, yeah, they can see through spider webbing. They may get stuck in spider webs the way they may also get stuck in the screen on your porch. They can see through it, they think they can fly through it, and then they end up getting stuck. Golden orb weavers and our other large orb weaving native spiders, we don't think are really going to be a problem in terms of being predators of hummingbirds. But the new Joro spider that has been found, not only in Georgia, but in North Carolina now, we're not sure about. We're really actually quite concerned. It is an Asian spider that made its way to the US some years ago now. I'm not sure the exact year, but it's been here a while, but it's now been seen, oddly enough, mostly in the western counties of North Carolina. But this is a larger spider that does have the capacity to eat hummingbirds. I believe it already has been documented. And I'm afraid we're going to be starting a new sort of citizen science project looking at things that people notice in the webs of Jaro spiders, because they are becoming in certain places rather common, and they believe that Jaros are going to be found all up and down the East Coast before long, because they are unfortunately a cold adapted species of spider as well. So stay tuned on that one. Not another not so happy note, unfortunately. Of course, I can't do hummingbird work without talking about hummingbird feeders. Feeders have been on the landscape for a number of decades now, and some are better than others. And what I'll tell you about bird feeders is that, if you don't already know this, there is no regulation in the industry of feeders or feeding anything, food, feeders, anything out there. It's not regulated. So companies can make claims about their products that aren't true and get away with it. And unfortunately, in the hummingbird feeding industry, it's a big dollar industry with more stuff out there on the market every year. We have feeders that don't work, that you can't clean, and some feeders that are actually dangerous. The feeder that I showed here is a very popular one. I bet a number of you in the room have this feeder, or the newest version of it, which is actually a bit better. This is the Perky Pet 4-fountain feeder. And if you give ruby throats a choice of feeders across the landscape, they will come to this one ahead of others. And I think it's because of the fact that it's the right size for them to be able to perch and feed from the feeding port. They also can feed without putting their head down into the feeder. They can be watching for predators, watching for competitors while they feed from the feeding port. It is a feeder that is now, unfortunately, it's made in China. It was developed in this country years ago, but it's no longer manufactured here. There are other choices. One of the things about this feeder and virtually all reservoir style feeders, which this is, the food is in the reservoir, the glass reservoir up top, is that these sorts of feeders seep or drip invariably. And so they're going to attract bees and wasps and other things and make a mess in some cases by virtue of the seeping and the dripping. A far better alternative is to use a saucer style feeder where the food is all in the base, where bees and wasps are not gonna know that there's sugar water there. You're not going to have that sort of problem. They're gonna be easier to maintain. And for those of us who are sensitive to bee stings, this is definitely a better way to go to reduce the odds of getting stung. And this is a Humzinger feeder made by the Aspects Company. Very good American company that has very intensively tested all of their products. This feeder comes in 2 different sizes. And there are other saucer style feeders out there that are good as well. Generally, saucer style feeders are really the way to go because not only do they not seep or drip, they're easier to clean, much easier to clean. This thing just pops open in 2 pieces. It also has a built-in ant moat there around the hanger. But what I'll tell you is in my yard, I have to use an ant moat, which you'll see in a second, because that little ant moat there built into the feeder is nowhere near big enough. I put water in this thing and the chickadees, the nuthatches, the house finches, everybody drinks the water out of that ant moat. So I have to use a bigger ant moat in addition to the ant moat on the feeder in order to keep things and keep the ants from getting into the feeder. Because we have lots of ants here in North Carolina and they find your feeder no matter where you put it. The only reservoir style feeder that I'm aware of that is not going to cause you problems with seeping or dripping is the one that's pictured here. And it's got an ant moat above it. The ant moat in this picture is actually one you can't get anymore. You can get a plastic version of this, or you can even make an ant moat like the one in the picture by just using the top of a spray oil or spray paint can and making a hole, putting a dowel through it, and then putting screws on either end. That ant moat then can be filled with water to act as a barrier to the ants above your feeder. You don't want to put sticky stuff on the string, on the hanger of your feeder. This is what people have done for a long time, whether it be Vaseline, whether it be cooking oil, whether it be motor oil, whatever people have used in the past to keep ants away from your feeders. It's not a good idea because first, it doesn't work. And secondly, as the season progresses with more activity around the feeder, hummingbirds will bump into that sticky stuff and get it on them and not be able to get it off. And as someone who's given hummingbirds baths before because they've gotten into sticky stuff, it's not a good thing. So you want to use a moat, and that will really work. It will definitely work. The Dr. J's feeder, Dr. J.B. Whalen created this feeder. He is a retired radiologist in Charlotte. It was a family project that kind of spun out of control because he made this feeder. It was such good quality, so easy to use, so easy to clean. The hummingbirds love it. They couldn't keep up with orders, so he had to sell the feeder to a different company who now manufacture it. And the beauty of the new feeders, they have interchangeable larger feeding reservoirs. This is a 2-cup capacity feeder here, the basic design, but now you can get plastic reservoirs up to 72 ounces if you have a ton of hummingbirds, which people down in the Gulf apparently do because they sell out of those large quantity interchangeable reservoirs regularly, from what I understand. So lots of feeder choices out there, but you have to be careful what you buy. This is the packaging on the Dr. J's, and it's been around now for a while. And it's the design has changed a little bit, but not much. It's just a very good quality feeder that you can unscrew. You can pop the base apart. Essentially, is 3 different pieces, so it's very easy to care for, easy to clean, and as I said, yeah, the birds like it, and it's also very safe for the birds. There are definitely feeders out there that are not safe, and this is just one example of a feeder company that has gone to using a very small opening to try to combat the bee and wasp issue, and by doing so has made a feeding port that is going to be harmful to hummingbirds' bills. So you really have to be careful and make sure that the design that you're choosing has a feeding port that is large enough to be safe for the hummingbirds to feed. So that when they put their bill in there, they can get it out easily and quickly without it being injured. This kind of comparison here of the different sizes of acceptable feeder port apertures. And anything smaller than 3 millimeters is possibly going to be a problem for your hummingbirds and possibly going to cause bill abrasion or worse. So really be cognizant of this if you are going out to buy a new feeder. Of course, you know, sugar water attracts other things other than hummingbirds. We all know about orioles being attracted to sugar water. Right now, year round in my yard, I've got chickadees and brown-headed nuthatches and house finches that are all coming to the sugar water every day of the year. But in the wintertime, I also have ruby crowned kinglets, yellow-rumped warbler, pine warbler. I've had orioles myself. You know, western tanagers come to sugar water feeders. So by offering sugar water, you may end up with guests that you weren't expecting necessarily, and that's a lot of fun too, especially in winter. If you don't have a hummingbird, you might have somebody still coming to use your sugar water. Another very important fact if you're going to have a feeder is that you make your own sugar water with just sugar and water, no color, no preservative, just sugar and water, period. And 4:1 is the ratio that you want to use. Anything less than this, say a 3:1 or 2 to, God forbid, a 2:1 is not safe for ruby throats as far as we know. It will make them edemic because their kidneys can't handle that high concentration of sugar. So stick to the 4 parts to 1 part. They'll actually use feeders with a 5:1 as well. So, and when I'm measuring, it's not something that I do, you know, precisely as it is. You don't really, you know, need to be that concerned about it. But I will say that if you have city water, you definitely want to filter and or boil your water before you add the sugar, because you don't want any of those city water additives in there and the birds drinking them. So definitely think about that. I did, after Hurricane Fran, have to use rainwater to make hummingbird food because we had no pump, we had no electricity. So I was standing there stirring and stirring and stirring, and eventually the sugar dissolved. But that was just kind of an extreme situation. Having that, the heat really does assist in dissolving the sugar, obviously, but also the heat's going to be necessary in removing any unwanted additives in the water as well. So yeah, definitely no red dye. Red dyes usually are a petroleum-based byproduct, especially the ones that are used in hummingbird food mixes. And I can tell you that I know when I've been working with a hummingbird that's been eating from a feeder with red liquid because they pee and they poop red. There is also some evidence to suggest that red dye may be carcinogenic in hummingbirds as well. But all I can tell you is it's completely unnecessary. What they are drinking from flowers is most definitely clear. There is enough red on any hummingbird feeder to attract their attention. So you do not need to be using dye. It is a really bad idea. Also, if you're going to be maintaining a feeder, we know it's very important that you keep it clean because there are various microbes that will grow in a sugar water solution, and sometimes it will happen pretty quickly, especially in warmer, humid weather, which we're about to start experiencing, I think maybe tomorrow, for the next several months, well, a number of weeks anyway. So you want to be cleaning your feeder regularly, and that means every 3 days if it's in direct sunlight. Certainly no more than 5 days for cleaning and refilling. And when you're cleaning your feeder, it's best to just use very hot water, not any kind of detergents, because those will adhere to the plastic parts of your feeder, unfortunately. Vinegar is probably okay. And also From time to time, I will do a 10% bleach solution, especially later in August. There may be a few nooks and crannies that I can't get to that require some bleaching, so a 10% bleach solution is fine. You want to rinse your feeder really well, but should there be any bleach solution left, or any residue there, when you pour sugar water into that feeder, interestingly, that bleach is rendered inert, okay? But any kind of detergents that's there may adhere to the plastic, and the birds can taste that soap and they won't like it. So really just try to use hot water. I find when I'm keeping up with my feeders every couple days, I really only need to use hot water. I can get them clean without having to go to great lengths if I keep up with it, and so that I don't have stuff. I don't have fungus and mildew, mold and stuff like that growing inside my feeder. I can really keep up with it, and it's much easier to maintain. And that just brings me to my research, because you all are gonna have opportunities this summer, if you care to come out to one of my events where you'll be able to see hummingbirds up close. And my preferred method of trapping hummingbirds to ban them has been this wire cage trap over the years. But I also now use a mesh trap as well. So it kind of depends on where I am in the day as far as what method I'm using. But my research, even if it's in our yard, it seems like it always attracts an audience. And that's fine as far as I'm concerned. We've got a lot of kids in our neighborhood and adults in our neighborhood that love to come watch when we're trapping and banding hummingbirds in the yard. But we've got events lined up, as we always do. This year, we're thankfully going to be having a program once again at Prairie Ridge, and that's going to be on Saturday, July 20th, I believe. That should be well publicized, so you can come out and watch us trap hummingbirds, and we'll be banding, and we'll be talking about the birds and how to identify them. We should be seeing youngsters, so you'll be able to see how you can tell the difference between a young female and an adult female, and a young male, adult male. So coming out to see what I do and how I do it. And yes, like I said, I use this wire cage more often than not, and it's basically just baited with a feeder. Interestingly, see the feeder that I'm using there? Yeah, the one that's the best bait possible, one of those perky pets. I just wait for the bird to fly into the feeder, and then I'm holding the string over here. It's very low tech. I let go of the string, or my trapper lets go of the string, and this big trap door closes. And then I will take the bird out using one of the smaller doors on the side. And when hummingbirds are trapped like this, not surprisingly, as I said earlier, they fly up. So we can usually just kind of corner them on the ceiling of the trap or in the corners of the trap pretty quickly, pretty easily. And then we've got them. And then it's just a matter of putting on one of these tiny bird bands. That is, in the case of hummingbirds, not engraved, but laser printed with a number letter combination. And that just goes on around the ankle, just like any other bird band, except we use very small pliers in order to do this. And so we just basically crimp that band around the bird's ankle. Bird hardly knows it's there. It's like the equivalent of the weight of this wristwatch. It weighs about 1,000th of a gram. So the bird doesn't even really know that it's there. It's not going to come down over their toes, but it can move with them as they move, and presumably it will stay there for the rest of their lives. So that maybe, hopefully, possibly, I will recatch them again and have the opportunity to gather more data from these birds over time. I will tell you at Weymouth Woods, where I've been banding since 1999, that we have recaptures quite frequently. I've already recaptured 6 females. And I've only banded a few days, 6 females from years before. I think I calculated the other day, one of those females is at least 4 years old. These birds live 3 to 5 years on average, but believe it or not, a few females in Illinois came in over 9 years old. We don't think of them living anywhere near that long based on the data that we have. 3 to 5 years is kind of what we expect. But I do recatch these birds using this very same method. Sometimes I'll recatch the same bird on the same day. They don't seem to want to stay away. So yes, we really do. This whole method works very well. In addition to putting the band on, of course, I take measurements, and I also will weigh the birds and look them over for general health and well-being, and then the best part, letting them go. And if you're at one of my events, you might have the opportunity to be this person that gets to let the little bird go. It is a very special, special experience. I can't tell you, how magical it is for everybody, and myself included, when I get to let them go myself, when nobody else is around, which isn't very often, but that this is the best part of the whole thing, is to be able to let them go back on their way again. And they zip off and go back to doing whatever they were doing. So, it's a really fun part of my programs to be able to let people see these birds up close, because they are amazing to see at our feeders, but when you see them really close, it takes things really to another level. But for me, it's gathering the scientific data, and that's all been very, very important. So we know the ruby-throateds are migrants. They start leaving us, the adult males, believe it or not, because they show up so early, they begin migrating early as well. They'll start to leave in late July, some of them. Certainly they'll be leaving in August. Unlike this comic, they do not go in family groups. They actually go independently of one another, but they tend to take the same routes, kind of like us using I-95 or something. They tend to follow the same sorts of routes. But they start to head out, in late July. And we will have migrants coming through in August and September and October, on their way back down to Mexico, maybe. Ruby-throats can be found down through Central America. They don't quite make it to South America, or at least they don't very often. But a lot of them are found in the southern part of Mexico in the winter, and then down into Central America. And migration for these birds is triggered automatically by day length. So as the days begin to wane, they will begin to start replacing some feathers. They will get restless, they will eat, and then they will head out. And this all happens irrespective of the temperature or food availability. They go when their bodies tell them to go. And so for ruby-throats, that's going to be late summer or into the fall at some point, when they're going to be heading out. Migration, we believe, and there's so much we don't know about migration, but one thing that we do know, like I said, with these ruby-throats is that they go at a certain time. But what's interesting about the ruby-throats is that they don't use the same route in the fall they do in the spring. And my colleagues down further south, down in, say, Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, they're the ones who've picked up on this. Where they recapture a lot of banded, they have a lot of hummingbirds that come through, more than we do here in North Carolina. And they'll catch thousands during the fall, or maybe up to 1,000 during the fall. And they'll only recapture fall banded birds in the fall, and in the spring, they'll only recapture spring banded birds in the spring. So we think in the fall, they are following a coastal route down through the southern US, down into Central America, Mexico, Central America. But in the spring, like so many of our migrant warblers and other things, they actually fly across the Gulf to get back north. It's a shorter distance. Yes, it's risky, but they can get back to the breeding grounds faster that way. And prevailing weather works in their favor to do that. And so, so migration with these birds, it's a different route, spring versus fall. And that brings us to, once we see our last migrating ruby-throats, which here in Central North Carolina, like I said, nowadays can be sometimes not until November, but oftentimes it's sometime in October. At that time of the season, we already have what we call our winter hummingbirds showing up. And this particular winter hummingbird individual, I think, was an adult male that was here in Wake County. This is an adult male rufous hummingbird. Now, if you have an adult male rufous hummingbird show up, you're going to know that's something different, right? He looks very different. He's red-brown all over, and he's got a coppery gorget. The adult males, very different looking, very striking, very stunning. How many of you went to Eddie Owens's house and saw his adult male a few years ago? Yeah. He was so sad when that guy didn't come back. He was there at Eddie's for about 6 weeks. But he didn't come back. We do have rufous hummingbirds in North Carolina in the wintertime. We have quite a few of them. I won't say they're not common, but they're not as rare as we used to think. They're here and they can be found from the mountains to the coast. And we have individuals that come back and use the same feeders winter after winter after winter. We've had a couple here in Wake County that have spent, female rufous, that have spent 5, 6, 7 winters in the same yard. Okay, so yes, if you have one of these individuals show up, you may find that it comes back and visits with you year after year. Or like some people like Patty Tice up in North Raleigh, she's had different rufous hummingbirds every time. So you never know. The thing about rufous hummingbirds is that unless you've got an adult male like this fella here, you got somebody that looks like this, it's not as easy a call to make. This little gal, interestingly, notice that bracelet on her leg there? Yeah, I put that there, not in this yard. This was this is a yard up in North Raleigh. I actually put that band on her 2 years prior in Smithfield. And so, okay, she's come back to Central North Carolina, but she's decided she doesn't want to stay in the same yard. She's spending different winters in different places. But the females have a little bit of color in the throat. And also, you know, she's got this color on her sides, but for the most part, she's the same size and shape as a ruby throat. But the thing that really hits it home is if you see that rufous in the tail. That rufous in the tail tells us, okay, that's definitely not a ruby throat. But the problem is rufous hummingbirds have a very close cousin called the Allen's hummingbird. And some of you may have seen both rufous and Allen's if you've been out in the western part of the US. Allen's are found, we think, you know, very restricted range along the west edge of the west coast. However, even though they're not thought to be really migratory, they have ended up here in the eastern US. And they have ended up here in North Carolina on multiple occasions. And they are, the females and the young males are very hard to tell apart from rufous hummingbirds, which are more likely to be here. And in fact, unless somebody sends me a really good picture, they get lucky. I have to catch a bird that looks like this and say, okay, yeah, it's a rufous, it's not an Allen's. Because they're just, the size difference is minuscule. I have to look at individual feathers on the tail. I have to look at them and measure them to be able to decide Allen's versus rufous. Okay, we also have broad-tailed hummingbird, which is also similar. And we had North Carolina's second broad-tailed this past winter. That's another tricky one. And calliope hummingbirds too are fairly similar, the females and the juveniles to rufous. So yeah, in the winter, identification becomes really tricky. And a lot of it revolves around us being able to catch these birds so that we can measure them. Why is this what it means? Okay, and this just gives you an idea. This is the summary of the western true vagrants that have been here. Everything but rufous are considered vagrants, but that have been here. Black-chin, we have a black-chin almost every year, in fact, multiple black-chins usually these days, mixed in with the others. But we have had all of these species here, and almost certainly we're gonna find other western species here in the wintertime, things like white ear hasn't shown up yet, Riveles has not shown up yet. We have that blue-throated, which most people don't consider official. I do because I know the people who saw it, but that one's considered a little iffy. That bird showed up in a yard out in Buxton on Christmas. And the homeowners thought, well, it's Christmas. We just don't really think any bird watchers are gonna want to come out and see this crazy looking hummingbird on Christmas. Boy, were they wrong about that. But in any event, we've had quite a variety of hummingbirds here in the winter. And we could just spend a whole night talking about these records, but I'll just highlight it by saying that 2 years ago, we had the rarest hummingbird to show up yet. And it was this guy here, except when he showed up in December, he didn't look like this. I got pictures from the homeowners because they had a rufous hummingbird before that I abandoned. They sent me photos of this guy. He was a juvenile male, I could tell that, no question about it, because he had enough color coming in his throat that I could tell he was going to be a male something. But we waited for me to go visit for a number of reasons, and I'm really glad that we did. Because, by the time I got there, this is about 2 days after I abandoned him, 3 days after I abandoned him. When I got there, I was expecting to find an Allen's hummingbird, because there were some things about his tail that looked right for Allen's. There were just things about it, like that funny greenish kind of greenish yellowish wash on his sides that didn't add up. So when we got there and we caught him very quickly. The first thing I noticed when I took him out of the trap was, this bird is too big to be an Allen's hummingbird. And then I turned and looked at it, and I wasn't sure what I was seeing, because all of a sudden I saw this color up on the top of his head. Okay, and I'm thinking, this is a hybrid. This is the first hybrid we've ever had in North Carolina. And it turned out within hours, we realized he was a hybrid Allen's and a hummingbird. So of mixed lineage, adults that probably met up out there on the West Coast, got together somehow or other, the two of them, and they produced this hybrid offspring. And boy, this picture does not do him justice. He was a real stunning bird. And I told the homeowners, I said, he is molting, he's almost done molting. When he's done, he's gonna leave. And sure enough, I think the day after this picture was taken, he headed out. Because that's what males do early in the late, well, kind of in the spring. Yes, nowhere near summertime, but it's late winter, early spring. So he is our rarest hummingbird to date, but I'm sure we're gonna have, every year something interesting happens, and we have a neat thing happen in the wintertime. Even if it's just the ruby throats that we find along the coast of North Carolina, which we're still learning about. Some of these ruby throats down in the Buxton area, I've now found are actually year-round individuals. They do not migrate, but they're mixed in with the migrating ruby throats. So picking them out is tricky. But yes, we do have some ruby throats along the coast in the wintertime as well. And having a winter hummingbird these days is not as nerve-wracking as it used to be, because believe it or not, there is a cottage industry of feeder heaters that you can get. You can certainly create your own feeder heater, but there are commercial ones available now, and this is one of the 3 varieties that you can buy. And this was born out of the fact that up in the northwestern US, not here in the southeast, up in the northwest, there are now year-round rufous hummingbirds and Anna's hummingbirds along the coast. And so people want to keep their hummingbirds happy out there, so they've created these feeder heaters out there. And of course, lots of people in North Carolina and the southeast are happy to buy those feeder heaters as well, because it makes life a lot easier for winter hummingbird hosts. So that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of hummingbirds in North Carolina, but I just wanted to kind of give you a broad view. And I certainly have to thank all of our donors who make this work possible. Really to thank the people in the winter in particular that allow me to come to their homes and get to know their hummingbirds, to trust me to come in, or Dwayne or myself or Tiffany, to come in and get to know their hummingbird. Without them, we couldn't do this, because this truly is in the wintertime a big citizen science project. So I really am indebted to those who have supported us with donations, and also the ability to come in and get to know their birds, and also those who have helped me with donating slides for me to use in programs like this one. I really owe you a lot. For more information on hummingbirds and our hummingbird events and things, you can go to either the Bird Observatory website or to the North Carolina Hummingbirds Facebook page, which thankfully is being moderated by somebody other than me. And so, yeah, there's someone that's moderating it, and she does a really good job of controlling the content. And we do a lot of education there, and also advertise our events, our hummingbird events. And you can also just email me directly if you want to. And the information about my research, in addition to the plants, handouts we have up here, so you can get one of those on the way out if you care to, or just, feel free to stay in contact with me, and I'll certainly be in contact with you all to let you know what I'm doing by virtue of our good friend John Gerwin back there, who also loves hummingbirds. So I'm sure you'll know what's going on, and I hope a lot of you can come out to Prairie Ridge, because that should be a really good day, a good morning, and hopefully we'll catch a bunch of birds that day and be able to see a lot, several different hummingbirds, up close. So with that, I'll take questions. Yeah.
I'm gonna start off with a Zoom question. Is there a best type of sugar?
Is there a best type of sugar? Okay, you want to basically just use table sugar. You don't, you certainly don't want to use honey because there are things that grow in honey that hummingbirds, that are lethal to hummingbirds, but basic table sugar is all you need, nothing fancy.
And I'll do one more from online and then we'll switch to in person. When do hummingbirds sleep? And where and how do they sleep?
Okay. Okay, hummingbirds sleep at night like we do. Unlike us though, they are triggered to go to sleep by darkness. So as it gets dark, they will find a safe, sheltered spot. Typically, I'd say in thicker vegetation. They aren't inclined to use bird boxes, although there's some anecdotal evidence that they have used bird boxes at times, especially in the winter. But they'll find a good thick spot where they're protected from the weather and from predators. And they will go into a sleep state until they're roused again in the morning as it gets light. Yeah. Good question. Anybody else? I'll hang around for a little bit if you have, personal questions that you just don't want to bring up right now, but, I'm sorry that we had the technical issues we did, and so we're running kind of late, and I understand that too, so. Yes.
With ant modes, one of the products that I'm seeing a lot of is an ant mode that has some sort of ant insecticide in it.
Okay. Yeah, I know what you're talking about, ant modes and the type that they sell that has an insecticide in it. And that's really just completely unnecessary. And I'm not really sure, I think it was somebody who thought, that this would be a good idea. Not really realizing that it's just not necessary. I will say though that I did maintain feeders at Red Oak Brewery for a while, and I was going up there because no one else up there could manage it. So I was driving to Greensboro twice a week during the season. And up there, we had problems. I was using ant boats with all the feeders, but only going up twice a week. Those ant boats were drying out quite a bit. And so there are times where you may have a situation where your birds are drinking the water out of the ant boats, or you're traveling or whatever. It's okay to take that moat, invert it, and then use a little bit of sticky something on the inside lip of that ant moat. And with that, that's not going to kill anything. It's just going to deter the ants from getting, to the feeder. But you're using something sticky like that instead of water, but it's in the inside of the moat where the birds are not going to come in contact with it. But yeah, those moats, I've never been able to figure out, they've been around a long time, but I think it's because they get more money from you getting the refill insecticide thingies that go in there. I think that's what it's more all about, is the, the bottom line, of course. Sure.
Should the hummingbird water be a certain temperature, like if you refrigerate a whole bunch that you make, should you warm it up?
Okay, asking about the temperature of the sugar water, it does not really matter. They will drink cold water. They will also drink it when it's sitting in the sun on a 95-degree day, because if you think about it, the flowers that they visit, the nectar in those flowers can be pretty warm as well. I would guess that if it's a little too hot for them, they'll just pull it back off for a bit, let things cool down. But in terms of having to warm it up when you've been storing it in the refrigerator, you don't really have to worry about that. You don't need to bring it to room temperature, no.
I'm gonna ask one more question from online. Do hummingbirds get mites?
Do hummingbirds get mites? Yes, they do. And actually, there are mites that have evolved with certain species of hummingbirds to use them as a transport mechanism. And so what happens is these mites will be in flowers that the birds visit, and they'll be waiting in a certain place on that flower, so that when the hummingbird's there for, a couple seconds, these mites can hitchhike, jump onto the hummingbird's head or bill, And when the bird moves to a different flower, then they hop off. It's just like, you know, taking the right bus or the right train. And so, yes, they do get mites, and the mites in some cases are involved with the birds. In some cases, they're more generalist mites that are actually, you know, feeding on the hummingbird and not so much interested in being moved around from flower to flower. Great questions, great. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. We always have some desserts in the back, so there's some, you know, little cake and cookie. I didn't eat it all. I just ate a few options.
And anybody new tonight, if you'd like to sign up to join Audubon,